Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me here. Thank you very much for your welcome. I'd like to just add a comment to what Sharon has said. She's spoken about the challenge of retiring and what you're going to do. I went through that process many years ago. And on the first morning when I would otherwise have gone to work, I sat down and I prayed to God that he would help me to be a blessing to my neighbours. It was a December day, and there was a knock on the door, and my neighbour came and said that our sewer was blocked. We have a common drain that runs down from the house above, past my house, my neighbour's house, and it was blocked. And by 12 o'clock that morning, I was pushing draining rods through a drain to help my neighbour. Now, if you ask God to do certain things for you, you've got to be prepared for the consequences of it. But I do say that positively and genuinely, because that is what prayer is about. And you have to take the challenges that come with that. I didn't say the rough and the smooth. You have to take the challenges which come with that. If you've got a Bible, will you turn with me, please, to Psalm 124. Psalm 124. And depending, as you open it, depending which version you're reading, it either says it's a song of ascents, or it says it's a psalm of degrees. Now, I don't want you to be put off by the degrees. It's not about Oxford or Cambridge. Think about it more in terms of when I set off from home this morning in Derby, the temperature gauge in my car said it was 13 degrees, and when I got to you nice, friendly people in Uttoxeter, it was 14 degrees. So it's about the steps going up, because they were songs or psalms of ascent. If you look in the reference books, you see various explanations as to what they could have been ascending. And there are three options which I'll give you, and you can choose which one you want to follow. One is to say that Solomon's temple was built on two stages, two levels. So to get from one level to another level, you went up 15 steps. And the faithful Jews, as they went up each one of these 15 steps, sang the Song of Ascent. That's number one. Number two is to say that 3 times a year the children of Israel, wherever they were in the land of Israel, had to go to Jerusalem, and these were songs which they sang as they were going up to Jerusalem. The third one is there were the songs which the children of Israel sang when they were coming back from being in exile in Babylon, and they sang those songs as they walked back up to Jerusalem. Now, because those options all applied 2,500 years ago or 3,000 years ago, you don't have to choose which one it is, but you can see that there are several options, several applications where those conditions would apply. And I'd like to, this morning, to show 3 applications of where those words apply for different groups of God's earthly people. So let's turn to Psalm 124. If the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side when people attacked us, they would have swallowed us alive. When their anger fled against us, the flood would have engulfed us. The torrent would have swept over us. The raging waters would have swept us away. Praise be to the Lord, who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. There are 15 songs of ascent. there's 150 psalms altogether, so 10 of them come into this category. They're Songs of Ascent. And although we'll concentrate on this one initially, you will see how relevant they were, that it was worth having 10% of all their psalms about God's support for his earthly people. It is easy to see that David, writing that 3,000 years ago, would have looked back and thought about the redemption of the children of Israel out of Egypt. The salvation, when they put the blood on the door, it was because of God's plan. When they came across the Red Sea and they were saved as they walked across the Red Sea with the Egyptians behind them, it was God's plan. Think about the challenge of going through the different countries of the Ammonites, the Moabites and Edomites, the challenges the children of Israel had of going through there. However could they have got through there? It was because God was on their side. However could an itinerant group of people defeat Jericho? It was such an example of asymmetric battle to think about a group of people walking round Jericho several times, blowing trumpets, and the walls coming down. It was because God was on their side. If you think about the challenges of their defeat of the occupants of that land, year in, year out, it was because God was on their side. If you think about the ups and downs when they had the period of the judges, and sometimes people did what was right in their own eyes and then they cried to God for help, it was because God was on their side. All the way through, you can see that, and you think about that nomadic people coming to the point where eventually Solomon, with all his wisdom, all his knowledge, could build that enormous temple. So there were all those points. And these Psalms of Ascent were by and large all along very similar lines. It was a recognition of what God had done for them. It was a recognition, when we looked at Matthew chapter 7, what more could the Father do? It was a recognition, it was a common theme of giving praise to God for what he had done and was doing for the people. If you look, it goes further down, it says, we have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The idea of freedom, the idea of protection, just so important in the history of God's dealing with his people. And we today, they then, and we now, are the beneficiaries of God's support for his people, his earthly people. That was the situation in the first category that I want to consider today in terms of considering God's people. We're told as parents that we should be very supportive of our children. We should say nice things about them. We should encourage our employees to say, well, it was a good idea that you've come up with. But there was something about God's dealings with his people that made them realize that they could not claim any goodness or greatness of their own, but it was all God's dealings with them. Because if you go back to Deuteronomy chapter 7, God says to them, it was not because you were a great people, it was not because you were a mighty people, it was because I have loved you. And that's such a powerful argument that stands the test of time, that there was nothing special about these children of Israel, but that they were loved by God, and they were the beneficiaries of it, and you could see the relevance of that psalm to their condition. Can I suggest that when you go home, you sit down and you read all these 15 psalms? It doesn't take long. They're short psalms. They're not like Psalm 119. They don't take too long to read, but they're well worth reading. And if you look at Psalm 131, let me just read part of what David says in Psalm 131. My heart is not proud. Lord, my eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with great matters or things too wonderful for me, but I have calmed and quieted myself. I am like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child, I am content. Lord, put your hope in the Lord. What a marvelous set of words from David, the king of Israel, with all sorts of mighty decisions to make. He put his trust in God, and he was able to write those words which are so meaningful and so relevant to a needy world today. But if that was in relation to the children of Israel of old, think about the church over the last 2,000 years. Think about the challenges of church history, of becoming, of setting off as a Christian in the Roman Empire. You were up against it at that time. The Romans were people who believed in inclusivity, diversity. They went for all those buzzwords of today, except for the Christians, because you could worship any god, but you had to worship Caesar. And you were going to be persecuted if you didn't worship Caesar. The Jews had a bit of an exemption because the Romans were accommodating to the Jews, but they weren't accommodating to the Christians. And just as Deuteronomy 7 says, you are the least of people, that was also said of the New Testament Christians. Because when Peter and John healed the man in Acts chapter 4, the religious leaders said they were unlearned people. They were uneducated, unskilled people. And Paul said that when he was writing to the Corinthians, because he said, not many mighty, not many rich, not many noble people are called, but you've been called. So the same sort of get back to basics, the same get back to recognizing that there's nothing special about you. It is because God has loved you and supported you that is important. And if you look at church history, you can go through all the challenges of the Roman Empire. You can think about what was it like in the Dark Ages, what was it like when Islam fought and went across North Africa into Spain, into France. What was it like in all those different situations? How are we here today? Why is the Christian world today still alive? Think about the age of enlightenment of 200 years ago, 250 years ago. Well, we've got all these new things. It's all important. We work things out. And the Christian world is still going on today. Think about the arguments of Charles Darwin and his buddies that the earth evolved over millions of years. The idea of God creating was put away to one side. And yet the Christian world is still active today. And it is not because we're great, it is because of what God has done, it is what the Father has done, that we are the beneficiaries of that today. So just as the passages which were read earlier spoke from a New Testament point of view, we can identify with them 2,000 years later. And I want to move on from there to talk about good news for everyone, because an organization which I've worked with for many years used to be called Gideons, and a simple activity of giving out testaments, placing Bibles in places. It's a challenging world, but God is blessing. And I want to share something of that with you today. We had a letter in recently to our national office from a woman called Cynthia. She had been at boarding school as a girl. She won a place at the Royal School of Music in London in the 1960s, thought this was great. She goes off there. She hadn't realised that there would be very few hours of teaching in this Royal School of Music, because you were expected to go away and rehearse, practice, day in, day out, by yourself. And she found herself in a very lonely situation, understandably so. And eventually you got to the point with eating disorders. The GP sends her off to a hospital. A consultant says, I'll take you into my hospital, but you'll have to follow a strict regime. And so this young girl is in a strict regime where she's got to stay in her bed all day long. She can't do anything else. Different types of food are going to be brought in at different times of the day. And it's just a totally alien culture. But she obliges, she does what she's told. She eats this diverse food. It's brought to her cheese sandwiches at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't know what's wrong with cheese sandwiches at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but she thought it was odd to be eating that then. She stuck to this program, and she started to get the benefit of it. And she looked around the room she was in, and in a cupboard was in the bedside locker was a testament supplied by what was then Gideons, now Good News for Everyone. And she read that. When she came to Psalm 139, she realized that God cared for her. God was involved in her life. He was involved before she was born. And she realized that God was interested in her, that somebody was interested and supportive. She became a Christian, and she wrote and said, thank you for that testament. I've gone on for 55 years since, enjoying what I've read in that. And I think that story is encouraging, A, because it was about the conversion of somebody, but secondly, of God's support, year in, year out, to help her through all the changing scenes of life. I've listened recently to testimonies of people who have become Christians by being given a testament at school. One man spoke about how he was at boarding school. He was called into the headmaster's study. He was thinking he was going to be reprimanded for something. And the headmaster said, I'm terribly sorry to tell you, your parents who have been working and living in America have been killed in a plane crash. And this boy was just absolutely devastated. He had been given a testament, he didn't really understand it, but over the years with support, he read this testament and he found salvation. Years later, he goes to a church and he speaks about his story, his event, and a couple say, we knew about you. We knew when your parents died. We prayed about you. We prayed about you for 28 years. And here was this guy standing in front of a church service giving thanks to God. And so I want to ask you to continue to pray for this work. We face challenges. I'm going to make the same point as I made last year when I was here in terms of the challenges of getting into schools today. It really is a challenge. All the culture of today is alien to wanting to give out testaments in the school today. Those of us who are older were brought up in a culture where even if you were not certain whether you wanted people to give out Bibles or not, the Christians won because they got the benefit of the doubt. They were neutral or perhaps good. But I think we live in a culture today where Christianity is seen as neutral or bad. And therefore, why ever would schools want to allow people to give out testaments today? That is just against the culture in so many ways. But please be encouraged for every opportunity we do get. In Derbyshire South, we can't get into more schools than we can get into, so the glass is not half full, half empty. It's less than that, but please pray for that. But God has been faithful. That's the point of the passage we read in Psalm 124. God has been faithful. God is continuing to be faithful today. When I came here last year, I spoke to you about this magazine Explore, which we produced, which is, and I brought along copies at the back, which is Luke's Gospel in a nice cover, a glossy magazine. The name Explore is about taste and see that the Lord is good. Just read it and explore and just understand about Christianity. And I spoke to you about a project in Newcastle upon Tyne to give out one of those to each household. And so we printed 150,000 copies. And now let me bring you up to date on that, because we have given out in Newcastle 60,000 copies. In the working class areas, in the poorer parts of Newcastle, 90% of the people take them when somebody knocked on the door and told them what it's about. Even in the more prosperous areas, it's 65%. Now, if you hear about a quiet revival going on, to use the words of the Bible Society, perhaps there really is evidence of this quiet revival, because if 90% of the people in the poorer parts of Newcastle, and as many as 65% in the more prosperous parts, are taking this, people must be interested in this. So I brought along some. Please take them and give them out to your friends and your neighbours. Talk to them about the bit at the front, the preface that tells you who Jesus is and gives you some testimonies. Use that as an opportunity. We go out to a number of agricultural shows and fairs and other events, again to meet people on an individual basis and say to them, here's something that's worth reading, whether we give them a testament or a magazine. Tremendous opportunities. Please be encouraged, but at the end of it all, it's God's work and we're the beneficiaries. Let me now just ask you to think about, why has Christianity stood the test of time? Because all the arguments would go against it. I've said before that where I live in Derby, not far away, is the site of a fort which was then the most northerly Roman fort in the empire. I mean, it went on further north, but in Derby, about AD 80, the Romans were building a fort. If I and all my neighbours had stood there in AD 80 and looked at the wealth and the strength and the prosperity of the Roman Empire coming, and somebody had come along and told about a man being crucified in Jerusalem, where would you put your money? Where would you put your confidence? Would it be in terms of the strength of the Roman Empire coming to Derby? It wasn't called Derby then, but ignore that. The strength of the Roman Empire coming, the legions, the underfloor heating in their houses, the Mediterranean wine, all those things, or a man on a cross in Calvary. Where would you put your money? And the test of time has been that what more can the Father give us is demonstrated. But why did it work? You say, well, the Great Commission. We were told to go and teach all around the world. And what was the undertaking? What was the guarantee? The guarantee was that the Lord Jesus said, I will be with you to the end of the age. Now, all those people who heard him knew of the power and the strength of great rulers, great leaders. 300 years beforehand, Alexander the Great. Think about the empire that Alexander the Great built. He died. Think about the Roman Caesars, the power they had. They all died. But the guarantee, the promise that was made that day was, I will be with you to the end of the age. And therefore, Psalm 124, whether you consider it in terms of the children of Israel, of Christians over 2,000 years, or good news for everyone, it's all the same. God has promised he will be with his people because it's his gospel, it's his power, and I commend that Saviour and that Lord to you. We're going to close with a hymn. We're going to close with a hymn which I think we've sung before.